Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be talking with Ted Lavin, president of SD Biz Pros. We're going to be speaking about the things you need to know when hiring your first employee. Specifically, Ted's going to cover HR and payroll. We'll see you in there. Welcome back, everyone. We have an exciting episode for you where we'll be talking with Ted Lavin of SD Biz Pros. Ted's company specializes in HR and payroll, two critical functions when it comes to hiring and maintaining employees, which I know can be one of the most intimidating aspects of operating and running a growing business. So Ted, at this stage in our course, enrollees are thinking about hiring their first employee. And so, that can be quite a daunting experience. So very excited to lean on your expertise as we start thinking about some of the challenges that lay ahead. And where I wanted to start was some of the things that, as a business owner, you really should be thinking about when bringing on that first employee. And I think in particular, deciding the contractor or full-time employee route. And I know you have some ideas there on maybe some things to be thinking about and the differences between the two.
Mm-hmm. Normally the progression when someone starts a company, they hire their friends and family. That's natural. But understand that the government considers these people employees. They're not just family, and they want their taxes and they want them on workers' comp. But really what I want to talk about is when you start getting outside of that so-called circle of influence.
Okay.
And you touched on what an independent contractor, also the term is 1099 because that's the government form you have to send in. And really, in the state of California, the government has used the ABC rule. A is, are they free of your control, or do you control them? The second part is, do they do what your business does? And the third is what they do normally independent? So an example would be, let's say a carpenter is hired by a construction company and they want to 1099 them. Well, are they under their control? Yes, because they have to be there at 7 o'clock.
Definitely,
they can't leave till 4.
Okay. And do you just have to check one of those off the list, or is it checking all three in order to qualify?
Has to be all three.
All three, okay.
And we'll go through this. The second one is they're in construction. The construction company builds things. They're a match. So they do what the company does. And then the third one is that a trade that normally works by themselves? Well, probably not a carpenter. They work with other people. So this person would clearly be an employee.
Okay, I see how that works.
The other side is, let's say this construction company hires a web developer. Are they under their control? No, the web developer can come and go as they please.
Sure, they just kind of have a loose timeline of when it should be done, most likely.
Right. Yeah. Second is, do they do construction? No, they do web development. So it's very different than what the company does.
That makes sense.
And then the third, yes, a web developer is pretty much an independent occupation.
Yeah,
it doesn't rely on
home.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a lot of people try and get around the government taxes and work comp, say, well, I'll just call them an independent contractor, but I'm just warning, don't do that. It's kind of treading.
Yeah, and the tax piece is huge, so we can lead in there and then maybe we'll come back to the full-time employee component of it. But really, when you're paying a 1099 contractor as the business, you're saving on taxes and it can be pretty significant, right? What are those different tax levels that ultimately show up on the payroll statement, which we'll talk on a little bit later?
Right. And I just want to say the reason it's 1099 is that's the government form.
Oh, yes, right.
And someone if you pay them over $600 a year, you have to file that. So that's the independent contractor 1099. Those terms are interchangeable.
So that's an important threshold. So over $600 a year,
you should be
filing a form under that level.
The 1099 form. Correct.
Got it.
Now you look at an employee, the different costs are, first, everyone's heard of FICA. It's Social Security, Medicare. These percentages are set by the government. So Social Security is 6.2%, Medicare is 1.45%.
Okay.
Then you have your unemployments, the federal and the state. So federal is 0.6%.
Okay.
And then the state, when you register as a new company and you get your EDD number or FUTA number, they assign you 3.5%. That's what your unemployment, that's what you have to say.
Okay.
In 3 years, they take a look at it. If you don't have any claims, they'll lower the 3.5%. If you do have unemployment claims, it'll go up.
So naturally, what industry you're in and the type of business you're operating in, there's more likely or less likely an opportunity for that? Is that why they'll adjust it?
Well, no, it's unemployment.
It's just turnover?
It's straight claims.
Okay.
Now, you don't necessarily, a lot of people, one of their employees filed for unemployment. If it's generally a good reason why you let them go, you can fight that and get it so they don't get it. So
interesting.
if you have people that are filing against you and there's really no reason why they should, you can go and there's a court and there's a hearing and you can get that excused.
Okay.
So, but again, if you have no claims, they look at it in 3 years, they'll lower it. If they look at it in 3 years and you have claims, then it'll go up, and the maximum it can go to is 6.2%.
Wow, okay.
And then you have your workers' comp, and that's a percentage. So really, as a business owner, what you want to do is see for every dollar I'm paying my employee, how much is it going to cost? And you can get it down to a percentage. There's 6.2, 1.45, your federal, your state, and then your work comp is a percentage. So
that makes a lot of sense. And so from a 1099 perspective, you're not paying the employer's portion, right? With a full-time employee, there's both the employee as well as the employer portion that's covered.
Correct.
So is that where the big tax savings ends up showing up?
On yours, yeah. The employee still has to pay. They have to pay the FICA, the Social Security, Medicare. Then they have their state income tax, federal income tax, and then they have state disability insurance.
Okay.
But those are just deductions from the pay that you would pay them. So that's not a cost to the company. But the original ones I mentioned, the FICA, the 2 unemployments, and work comp, that is a percentage that is coming straight out of your pocket, out of the business.
And so that's also important, even though primarily the enrollees are going to be business owners themselves, but in a lot of cases they might be doing contract work and they might be the 1099 recipients on the receiving end. So it's important for you guys to recognize too that you would actually be responsible for paying that tax as the 1099 employee recipient, correct? Because typically if you're a full-time employer, the company is paying a portion of that tax for you. Whereas from what you're saying, you'd be responsible for that as the 1099.
Right. Anything over, like I said, 600, you pay your normal taxes, whatever tax bracket you're in.
Okay, so that's really important for you guys to recognize. And so obviously there's the ABC test is determining when you're going to qualify as the 1099 versus the full-time employee. Once you though have that employee, I mean really either way, you're going to have some sort of payroll process, right, in order to disperse these payments. How does a new owner evaluate the different payroll providers that are out there? Because there's certainly a lot of them. There's even some do-it-yourself approaches, and there's ADP is the gorilla in the room. Like, so how do you distinguish between the two different or multiple different levels that are available?
Well, there's a lot of times a business owner wants control and they want their fingerprint on everything. Although I would highly recommend that payroll is just not one of them. You also have quarterly filings. The state is DE9, DE9C. You have federal 941. You have year end. You have W2. So there's a lot that you need to know. And unfortunately, if you're not doing it right, not knowing the law is not an excuse.
Yeah, ignorance is not bliss.
And so it can be 9-10 months before they catch up to you.
Okay.
And then you have not only the back payments, but you have a lot of times fines, penalties, and those to catch up. So that's one of the areas that I would say for a business owner, definitely get a professional that knows what they're doing. It's going to be a cost savings for the owner.
Yeah, and I've actually run into companies that I've worked with that are actually paying back taxes. So it's not uncommon that happens. And it's really detrimental because as the business is operating, what was revenue that they were anticipating would flow right through to the bottom line. They're now having to kick back a portion of that in back taxes because they didn't really know, again, ignorance is not bliss in this case. They ended up having to pay the piper, and it's now hurting, not that they're going to be out of business, but it's, not profit that they're having to keep.
There's the cost, but there's also, it's not a good time to be through. I've just had a lot of people call me, and they're very nervous. It's not a good time. So it's just not worth it. Get a professional from the very beginning and do it right. And focus on what you know how to do and let another professional do what you don't know what you're doing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I think similar kind of line of thought, a lot of the business owners are going to be maybe doing their own bookkeeping too. And a lot of the times the bookkeeping is going to flow through to the payroll. I imagine that's another area where you probably tell people might be a good idea to outsource some of that bookkeeping responsibility.
Absolutely. There's QuickBooks is very prevalent. A lot of people know how to do it, and they're good at it.
Yeah.
And it's a great program. So a lot of times you do both. They do your business side. So what I'm thinking of, you have a business, you draw a line down the middle, you have the business side and you have the employee side.
Okay.
Although we're focused on the employee side, a CPA or a QuickBooks person can do both.
Okay.
And that's what I mean, because you have, like they say, just the quarterly reports, and if you don't get those right, and there's so many QuickBooks people, and they're not very expensive.
No, it can be cost effective.
And then as you grow, then you may need to get above what they know.
And that's actually was going to be my next question. So we're kind of talking right now about hiring your first employee. Are there different thresholds as the business starts growing, thriving, and really new heads are coming up in the company that we need to be aware of that maybe require different reporting? I remember, there's a healthcare threshold, I believe, where you have to start offering employee benefits. What are some of those key thresholds that enrollees should be aware of?
Well, the one is number of employees, and that's
Okay.
if you're at 26 and below. For example, in 2020, the new minimum wage is $12.
Okay.
26 employees and more is $13 an hour. If you have a salaried person, they have to be double $13 an hour. So it's like 50,000 or 54,000, right around there.
Interesting.
So there's different thresholds when it comes to that.
Okay. So just to kind of recap payroll, because I know we touched on a lot of things there. So we have the FICA, the unemployment insurance, both at the federal and the state level. And then we also have workers' comp. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about workers' comp on that kind of line item as well.
Yeah, the number one, workers' comp is the law. When you have employees, you have to have it.
Okay. Important.
Yeah. So there's a lot of carriers, and there's brokers like myself. We go out and kind of search the market, and then there's other people that have, like State Farm, they have their own.
Okay.
So whoever you're comfortable with, the broker, just go through them.
And so
it's
that's
P&C insurance is what it's called.
I think that's an important note, though. So with the other taxes, I mean, it just is what it is. You're paying that off the bottom line. With the workers' comp, you can actually broker that out and shop around to maybe look at some more attractive rates than otherwise.
You can, and if you're starting a company, most likely, since it is the law, there's a government department called State Fund.
Okay.
SCIF is their other term for it, and they have to insure you.
Okay.
And what it does, it's basically how risky your industry is. If you're in the roofing, you're going to pay a lot more than if you were in a clerical environment.
That's what I was thinking about before.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's it doesn't matter if it's a service industry or product. There's work comp codes is what they're called.
It's
and
kind of like what's the likelihood of an injury to happen?
In the past, they look at it. The WCIRB goes through and says, okay, roofers get in accidents this amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
Secretaries or clerical work don't. Internet developers, not much. Roofer, so they go through each one. And you can have multiple codes inside of a company.
Okay.
So just because you have someone doing clerical and someone doing
Makes
roofing,
sense, yeah.
they're going to have two. And it's a percentage of the salary that you pay them.
Okay, so kind of it's allocated based on the dollar amounts that are going to.
Yeah, and some of them have dual codes. So if you're a roofer making under $25 an hour, you pay more than if you're a roofer making 26 or above. Because if you're going to get that amount of money, you're more
sense.
experienced.
Yeah.
Your chance of getting hurt are less.
Okay, that makes sense.
And you can do things to help yourself, like have a safety inspection, and OSHA will come out and look it over and give you hints. Even the carriers themselves have people that will come out and give you recommendations
on how you can drive that cost low.
How you can drive that cost low.
Okay.
The worst thing in work comp is to go without protection. The second worst thing is missing payments.
Okay.
But if you get dropped, it's really hard to get coverage back again.
And to your point, you need it, so you
It's
definitely don't.
you have to have
be
it
in that situation.
Yeah.
All right, so just to recap, because I know there was a lot that we just unpacked there. So as you're thinking of a typical payroll statement, there's a few things that are going to come out of the paycheck. So there's FICA, which is made up of Social Security as well as Medicare taxes. So those two together is what we're seeing as FICA.
And those are set by the government.
It's preset, can't really do anything there. We have the unemployment insurance, both at the federal and state level.
Yeah, and I want to touch on something. There's what's called an industry term drop-offs.
Okay.
In other words, so if you're at 3.5%, when that employee makes $7,000 in gross wages, your responsibility for paying is done. You've paid your $245, so I took 7,000 times 3.5. You're finished paying that. On the federal, 0.6, as soon as you hit that, you've paid your $42, you're done paying it.
Important point. So yeah, it's capped pretty quickly.
It's capped. As soon as they make $7,000 in gross wages, your unemployment responsibility goes away.
That's important to note before you start running the numbers in your head and thinking these are going to be astronomical.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still, it shows up on the bottom line, but it's not maybe as daunting as it sounds.
$42 for, yeah.
Okay, and then the last piece there to conclude, workers' comp, industry specific depending on, or I guess class of function specific
right.
on how expensive that might be. So as we move through payroll, because that's ultimately going to be what comes to your net pay, there's some actual HR components of this employee too. And I know there's some, you already touched on OSHA, but there's some critical, I think, service providers to be aware of, but then also forms, right, that you really want to address when you're bringing on a new employee.
Yeah, the number one thing I would recommend is an employee handbook.
Okay.
And in that, you get exactly what you pay for. If a business owner wants to try and go on the internet and pull one down and try and put it together, if you go to get sued, the opposing counsel will know that you got it from the internet, and it's probably not real good. Now, HR people do a good job at putting handbooks together, but like for us, we refer them to our attorney.
Okay.
And an attorney puts it together.
Which seems logical.
Yeah, and it's almost, think of it as insurance. It's the rules of the company, and generally if someone's going to sue an employer, they go to the attorney, and that's the first thing their attorney asks is, let me see the employee handbook.
Okay.
They want to see what they're looking at. If it's put together really well, there's a chance they may not move forward with it.
So you just went to what was going to be my next question, and ultimately I think the biggest fear of pretty much any business owner is, all right, I have this employee, there's that old expression, hire slow, fire fast. But then we also quite often hear about concern about firing employees, and what are some best practices to ensure you're, one, protected as a business owner, but two, then to your point, if you are to get sued, some of the kind of CYA type of things that you can be doing, obviously the employee handbook being a critical one.
That's number one. Some of the other forms you need, you've heard of I-9, and certainly immigration has been in the news for a while. What you're doing is there's 3 columns, and of course the government's involved, so it has to be kind of complicated. Yeah. Column A is documents that they'd be asking for, passport. And then they have B and C are things like driver's license, Social Security. But the way they confuse it is you either need something from column A or something from column B and C.
Yeah,
so a lot of people,
DMV situation.
Yeah, a lot of people want to make copies of it and put it in the file. My recommendation is don't. You're signing that you looked at it and the form looked legitimate.
Okay.
And you copied down the numbers on the I-9 and you sign that. You can keep copies, but you have to make sure you have copies for everybody. So it's easier just to make copies for nobody, and then you're safe.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
And you keep that. Now, one thing about I-9s is you need to keep that in a separate file that is locked. You can't keep that in the employee file. So again, get a professional, because there's a lot of little nuances that the chance you're getting caught, probably slim, but if you get caught, you're losing sleep, and it's very expensive.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's not worth the headache or trying to play that game. It's just do it the right way.
Exactly.
And do it right.
Another form that we recommend is an arbitration agreement.
Okay.
It used to be a condition of employment. In other words, you can't work here until you sign that. And what it is, it goes, if you go to sue the employer, it goes to an arbitrator versus in court. But now I'm not sure if any day it's probably, if it hasn't already said, you can't make that a condition of employment.
Interesting.
Someone can refuse not signing it.
Now that I'm thinking of it, I just worked with a contractor who had that as part of the contract that they put together, was an arbitration agreement.
But I haven't spoken to it. I think it was going to get overturned, that say you can't make that a condition.
A condition of, okay.
Yeah. Again, it's a lot of, it's nice having employees because you can gain, but then a lot comes with it. And as a business owner, you need to just say, is it really smart for me to do it, or hire a professional to do it and come in? And you talk about sometimes it's hard to get rid of employees, but what we recommend is we have a form called the Feedback Communicator.
Okay.
And what that is, you verbally talk to them, and then the second time you write it, put it in writing, and document everything. Because if you have to let them go at some point,
documentation.
You want to go to the unemployment board in that hearing and say, well, look, here's this communicator, here's this one, and you build up your case of why you're letting them go.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, I think that's an awesome area to finish on, because not that we would ever want to be firing. Ideally, we're growing, we're thriving, but at the same time, we do want to make sure we're protected. Obviously, a lot of us are putting a lot of risk and effort into growing our business, so we want to make sure we're hiring the right people, and if unfortunately letting them go, we're doing it the right way. So thank you very much. I mean, this was very informative for me. I know the participants got a lot of information out of it, so thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Wow, huge thank you to Ted Lavin of SD Biz Pros. Ted just packed us with a lot of information when it comes to hiring an employee. Specifically, I think it's important we always remember to pay our taxes and develop HR policies so that you can make sure your company thrives.